Mrs. Kimball. I hope everybody's doing well today. Today we're going to talk about part 2 of our woodpecker screencast. We're going to talk about those specific woodpeckers here in Pennsylvania that we're studying in Envirothon this year. All right, let's begin with a very, very quick review. There's that silhouette with those 3 red arrows pointing to the chisel beak, the climbing feet, and the stiff tail feathers. So we know that all woodpeckers have a chisel beak. We know that they have climbing feet that make the shape of an X. We know that they are diurnal. We know that they are cavity nesters. And we also know that they have extremely long tongues. All right, boys and girls, we are studying this year the northern flicker, the pileated woodpecker, and the downy woodpecker. We're going to discover that the pileated woodpecker is the largest woodpecker here in Pennsylvania, and the downy woodpecker is the smallest. The northern flicker, in my mind, is one of the prettiest woodpeckers that we have here in Pennsylvania. So let's go ahead and move to the section on the pileated woodpecker. This is all that screencast from the first part that we did. All right, the pileated woodpecker. Our largest woodpecker is the pileated woodpecker. They are close in size to a crow, but distinctly colored and shaped with a typical woodpecker posture. The only woodpecker of comparable size is the rare and probably extinct ivory-billed woodpecker. Pileated woodpeckers are up to 17 inches in length with large wingspans of 27 inches. Their backs and tails are black, and males have red cheek patches and a very large red crest on their head. The female lacks the red cheek patches, and her crest is less large. When in flight, white feathers flash on the other wings. Their very strong bill is capable of chipping out pieces of wood the size of a fist when they are excavating or searching for food. So here we go, the largest woodpecker that we have here in Pennsylvania, the size of a crow. That's a sizable bird when you actually think about it. His wingspan 27 inches. That's the equivalent of a little bit more than 2 rulers put together. The males have a red cheek patch. Let's go ahead and zoom in. This is a male right here. There's that beautiful red cheek patch. And look at that red crest. It starts right at the base of the beak. Okay, so right at the base of that chisel beak is where we're going to see the male's red crest begin. By comparison, if we zoom in on the female, her red crest does not start that low. If we could say that a bird has a forehead, then we would say that her red crest starts at the top of the forehead. Clearly a difference, and once again, she does not have that red cheek patch. All right, and pretty impressive that when they are busy chiseling or excavating a cavity, they can actually chip away pieces of wood the size of a fist. So they are very determined, those beaks are extremely strong, and they are very successful at what they do. Pileated woodpeckers prefer both mature, coniferous, and deciduous forests in woodlots or valleys. The more remote, the better. Their cavities are oval or rectangular, shaped at about 45 feet high, though they will nest higher or lower. The cavity itself may be as deep as 2 feet. Sometimes you can identify which woodpecker is using a tree on your property by the size and shape of the hole it has created. Pileated will make extra entrances to their cavity so that they have an escape route. They also drill extra holes to allow sap to run from their tree. This is thought to help prevent black rat snakes from climbing up to their cavities in search of eggs or nestlings to eat. Oh my goodness, that's a terrible thing. So they like to build their cavities in mature forests. That means older forests, which generally means larger trees. So they are not all that picky, it would appear, in terms of the trees that they like to use. So that first one is coniferous or conifers. Remember, C-O-N refers to cones. We were studying this the other day when we were outside. So coniferous talks about evergreen trees, trees that keep their needles all year round. The other type of tree that they would not mind excavating a cavity in is a deciduous tree. Deciduous trees are those trees that lose their leaves leaves in the fall. We're studying the sugar maple and the chestnut oak, which are two great examples of deciduous trees. By comparison, we're also studying the eastern hemlock and the red cedar, and both of those are coniferous or conifers. They like to be remote, if at all possible. It looks like they will excavate those cavities very high up, but are willing to go a little bit lower if necessary, and they could be as deep as 2 feet. Once again, there's those two rulers. Imagine excavating a cavity. You get through the bark, now you're in the middle of the tree, and you've got to go down another 2 feet. That's a pretty good sized cavity. Let's go ahead and take a little zoom in. Those are rectangular shaped holes that I see in this particular tree. It's an old tree. It looks like it's dying, quite honestly. And my guess would be that this is a pileated woodpecker based solely on the shape of that excavated hole, but I can't be 100% sure, but I am reasonably sure. That was a picture I took in my daughter's backyard that I thought was pretty cool. And I love the adaptation that they're apt to build an additional entrance for escape. And I love how they put holes in the tree to get the sap running. So that would be maybe in our maple trees. We've got some sap running, and that could possibly stop those black rat snakes from getting up and eating the eggs or the hatchlings. Excellent adaptation. Pileated woodpeckers nest throughout the United States, but are still considered uncommon birds. Their drumming is loud, varying between rapid, slow, and trailing off. Their call is a loud wicka 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 or ka 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 ka. Boy, I really have to work on those bird sounds, don't I, boys and girls? But it's always fun to try them out. So let's go ahead and zoom in. First things first, I am looking at a beautiful male pileated woodpecker. And I know this because I can see red on its cheek, and I can also see that red crest on his head begins right at the base of that chisel beak. By the way, at that base of the chisel beak, I see some of those very bristly like feathers that are used to protect his eyes, and I can also sense where that membrane might be to cover up when those wood chips come flying toward his face. And then there we can see those climbing feet, 2 feet forward, 2 feet back, and we see those short muscular legs. And if I move down just a little bit, there are those strong, stiff tail feathers. And that, boys and girls, when they talk about the posture of a woodpecker, is exactly what they're referring to, braced against the side of a tree. And there we go, the entrance to a cavity that's been excavated. They have to squeeze their little bodies through there and then lay the eggs down at the bottom. Perfect. So let's talk a little bit, let's sum up a little bit about that pileated woodpecker. Let's start with number one. They have bright red crest, and that's true for both the male and the female. They both have that very distinctive red crest on the top of their heads. Number two, black and white neck markings. Number three, body, tail, and feet are all black. And actually, in one of those pictures we looked at, it looked a little grayish, but grayish to black is what we're going to see in those feet that they have. Number four, they have long, black, stiff tail feathers. Remember, we talked about how those tail feathers, once again, help them brace and balance against the side of a tree. Number five, pileated woodpeckers the size of a crow. Crows are a good-sized bird. I think most of us have seen those somewhere along our travels, maybe on the side of a road eating some carrion or something like that. And remember, the wingspan for this pileated woodpecker is just a little over 2 rulers wide. Number six, woodpeckers have climbing feet, 2 toes forward, 2 toes backward, all the better to grip the side of a tree. All right, a red cheek patch on the males only. Females do not have that red cheek patch. All woodpeckers have long, sharp, chisel beaks, and the pileated woodpecker looks like he has an especially long, sharp chisel beak. Number 9, the male crest. The male crest begins somewhere around the base where that chisel beak meets the face. and then it tapers on back. As far as the female goes, if we could say that a bird has a forehead, then we would say that the crest for the female begins at the top of the forehead and moves back. So it's a little bit smaller, and when we have a side-to-side comparison, that becomes rather obvious. And number 11, this is the largest woodpecker in the United States, largest woodpecker in Pennsylvania. The cavity opening is usually rectangular in shape, but not always, and it prefers to nest in remote areas in mature forests. So prefers those larger trees, prefers a remote area, but it doesn't stop the woodpeckers from excavating in many different areas. Species like the pileated woodpeckers are considered a keystone species. This means that their behavior and presence within a habitat enables other species to live there. Without woodpeckers, many species would suffer. So by enabling other species to live there, as we continue reading down, you're going to discover that some species need to live in a cavity. Some other birds need to live in a cavity. Some other mammals need to live in cavities. And they are not capable of building them. But the woodpeckers are. And so they're a very important species. When you hear the drum roll of a woodpecker sounding off against a tree, it is a sure sign they are actively seeking a mate and a new cavity is about to be created. Lots of birds sing to create their territory before they mate and raise young. Woodpeckers drum, and the louder the better. Each time a woodpecker breeds, it digs out a new cavity. Every time, boys and girls, they are about to lay a new clutch of eggs, they must excavate a new cavity. That means that empty cavities are left behind everywhere a woodpecker has been. This is good news for other animals that like to nest in cavities. Some cavity nesters don't have the ability to dig out their own cavity and are dependent on woodpeckers to create one for them. So that keystone species, once again, is a species on which other species in an ecosystem largely depend, such that if it were removed, the ecosystem would change drastically. So it's very important to understand those cavities that a woodpecker creates are so important to other species within that ecosystem that if the woodpecker did not exist or was not making those cavities in that ecosystem, it would drastically affect those that live there. Very, very important. Keystone species are very important species to have around. And boys and girls, a quick reminder, an ecosystem, it's that balance between living and non-living things. And we can have multiple habitats within one ecosystem, but when we talk about those non-living, we're talking about the sun, we're talking about the wind, we're talking about water. The living things are the mammals and the plants and the birds, all that type of stuff. And it's all how they interact and thrive. We want the best and we want it to be diverse. Diversity is always important. All right, so here's a picture of two study species that depend on woodpecker cavities. The first is our eastern screech owl. I picked these two because these are study species of ours this year. That eastern screech owl is a little guy that we've already read about, and we know that he's part of the raptor/owl family. That means he's got a raptor type of beak. And boys and girls, there's no way a raptor type beak is capable of building a cavity. But the eastern screech owl needs a cavity, so he needs woodpeckers in that area. And then on the right, we have those adorable hooded mergansers. Remember, the hooded merganser is part of our waterfowl family. So they've got one of those duck beaks. And so that part also is very, very important. They've got that pursuit fishing beak, but there's no way that that beak is going to be able to excavate a cavity. Boys and girls, I don't know if you remember or not, in the very beginning when we studied the waterfowl, we had those adorable little hatchlings jumping out of a tree cavity. I think that cavity was 20 to 40 feet up in the air, and they were kind of flying through the air, landing on the ground and following their mother into the water for the first time. So once again, cavities are very important for both the screech owl and the hooded merganser, though they cannot create their own. All right, let's talk about